we forgot to pay the tax man.
How did you end up in this position?
Oh, okay, cool. Like you pray in that mezzanine bit.
Was that like your the main lesson that you learned, or were there a couple other insights that you learned, like developing this?
People are obsessed with becoming a founder.
A startup is an infinite set of problems.
Well, first and foremost, assalamu alaikum, Arfah. Thank you so much for joining us here at the Caravan Podcast here in London.
Wa alaikum salam. Thank you so much for having me.
So Arfah is the founder of Muslim Tech Fest, and this is why Hamza and I, the Caravan team, which is just us right now, are here. It's been an exciting time this week, being able to meet a lot of the entrepreneurs here local to London and some coming in from abroad. I guess jumping into it, how did you end up in this position? Like, was your career always surrounding event management, or was it something else?
No, I mean, like most things, things happen often by accident. So when I finished uni 2012, I accidentally founded a tech startup. And this is like very early London tech scene. It didn't really exist. Found myself in spaces with kind of like, got investment, found myself in accelerator, found myself in a space that didn't look like me. And startups fails, as these things do. And then in 2016, kind of because I was in and around this space, I was approached by another person on Twitter called Murtaza, who was like, hey, you're a Muslim techie, I'm a Muslim techie, surely there must be more of us. So I was like, oh, that's really funny. I had the same idea, but I thought there'd be 5 people in a coffee shop. So I'm like, oh, guess what? Where I work, I have access to a venue. I met a Muslim tech entrepreneur this weekend. Let's make him our speaker. And I was like, let's do our first event. Alhamdulillah, 50 people came to our first event. And then since then, we basically started to do like loads of meetups. And that was kind of the start of me building communities. But when I look back on it, I realized that I was the kid building school council and doing those things anyways when I was in school. Like, I just never knew it could be like a career path. And then, through Islamic Makers, I guess ultimately became a community builder. I got like a day job with it. I worked in kind of central government, building communities internally for like product managers, delivery managers. I was also seconded to NHS in their AI lab. So again, building a community of like doctors within AI. And then my last role before I went full time on Muslim Tech Fest was a building community in Impact VCs. So all of that kind of combined, and then Zahid I kind of met through Islamic Makers, and then that kind of led to Muslim Tech Fest.
There's a lot to unpack there,
Nabi. I know.
Well, first I was gonna say let's start like from the beginning. Like you stumbled your way to like a startup. Like maybe give us a little bit about your background. Like what side of the aisle are you on like your skill sets, and then how did you stumble your way into this startup?
Yeah, sure. So I was born and bred in East London. Kind of traditionally kind of known as a deprived community, and. But so I was on this like charitable program to help young people who were ambitious, but kind of needed all the connections and stuff to kind of help level the playing field. It was very ahead of its time. It was all delivered through like Google Hangouts. There was this lady, I always say she changed my life. Her name's Eugenie. And she basically kind of was known as kind of my mentor, but we used to use the word agent, like the person that kind of connects you, backs you up. And every week we would, or was it every 2 weeks, we would talk about different soft skills. Things like resilience and positive relationships. The whole thinking behind that came to the fact that she kind of was private school educated. And then when she was working in a inner city state school, she realized that, wow, these kids are talented, but the thing that they're missing are often this soft stuff, which kids in private school are taught. So she kind of designed this whole program to help with that. Anyways, that was all like, there was 12 of us on a Google Meets type thing over like a six month period. And we would do like little Tumblr blogs, and we were like, oh, how could we scale this? And at that time, the UK context was youth unemployment was at its highest. So there were a couple of like funding opportunities that opened to help solve it. So through that, we were like, okay, what could we come up with? I've never fit into a box, like never ever. And so I created a Pinterest CV. So I used Pinterest. I like pinned pictures of me doing different things, and it was almost like a visual way of like describing who I was, which a CV could never do. That combined with the whole like little program I was on was ultimately what created out the first startup, which was called Discoverables. And then, we basically got money for it. And then I was able to just go into this tech accelerator. And I didn't really know what it meant really to be a co-founder. And one of the funny reasons it failed was we forgot to pay the tax man.
That's something we can't do. like at least in the US, like it's very strict. I don't know how it is here. I'm sure it's strict as well, but like, wow, like that's interesting.
Yeah, it was just one of those things where I obviously had access to the bank account, and I used to sit there like pay myself, pay whoever I need to. And then one day I'm like, oh, how does pay you while you work, which is like tax after employment, and we just realized we just forgot to calculate the tax that we were meant to pay on people's. You're meant to put it on a separate pot. And it was just like something I randomly was like, I remember I was working from home that day, sitting in my bed, how does this work? Start Googling, and then I texted Janie and go, Janie, are we meant to pay tax on these things? And like she herself says it as well, because she came from the charitable sector as well, and she's never been good at that stuff. Anyways, that was quite a ride, because I remember we had, we had like bailiff letters and all sorts. And then I think in the end, like she obviously kind of, because she was like 10 years my senior, she was the one I think in the end, like, literally ended up having to pay that extra money to the tax man. So a lot of hard lessons.
Right.
So I've become very, now it's very, very like, now I've got an accountant, and now I'm like, I need to pay that thing. Like, can you send me the account details? Because I've become really like tense about it.
Yeah. No, but that's maybe like more of a just like that gives a little bit of insight to why the mentorship, community building, lessons learned, sharing is so important and valuable, right? Like there's collective wisdom in the community, tribal knowledge in certain areas, and if we can share that, like that's incredible, right? Or that, you know, that kind of makes sense. It sounds like there's a lot of lessons that were learned. What would you say are some of the, was that like your the main lesson that you learned, or were there a couple other insights that you learned, like developing this technology product that was community based?
Yeah, I think it's really funny now looking back on it, right? Because I think a lot of it was, it was always about building the MVP and building things and just getting things out there and getting users and all of that stuff. So I think a lot of that stuff really has always stuck to me. And I always look back on it, I'm like, wow, like imagine if 10 years ago we had no code tools and AI and all of this stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Like probably my path would have been very different, right? Because I think, at that point in time, we were almost like indebted to agencies and, external people. Cause she wasn't a techie, I wasn't a techie. I'm kind of tech literate, and like my job after that, I worked in a coding boot camp, so I picked up a lot there. But like, I'm not like a kind of a coder or anything. I've just always been very tech literate.
Mm. No, that's awesome. So in terms of like, what was like the next step? So you were kind of coming out of this like startup that you stumbled into, kind of what you would say like, a big lesson learned coming out of it. Then you started doing a bunch of community stuff, right?
Yeah.
So, and then it sounds like you were working with some impact venture funds and stuff like that. And it was multiple that you listed. So what were like the key lessons that were learned there, and how were they kind of applied to what you're doing today?
Yeah, sure. So I think, with my job that followed after the startup, when I worked in the coding bootcamp, it was like a marketing role. And, I was like one of the first marketing hires, and I was like, just creating random posters, putting Facebook ads. I was again learning on the job, right? And that was huge because it was all about like teaching people to code in 12 weeks. And that was kind of, and we used to do a lot about getting women into tech, which is when I started to think about ethnic minorities, Muslims in tech, and then obviously I met Murtaza, and then the whole Islamic Makers thing followed after that. I think like the main lessons really for me has always been just like, what's the problem you can solve, and like why you. And I feel like these days, like people are obsessed with becoming a founder, and it doesn't matter what it is. They just want to do something. But actually, I always say like, you might have the best skill set in the world, and you could be solving a problem, but if you're not really that passionate about it, then it makes it really hard to like stick at it. Mm-hmm. Whereas actually the ideal founder for me is always somebody who is, a great problem solver, solving for a problem, but like really understands that problem, comes from maybe that world. And then that, I think, is somebody who will have the grit and the resilience to carry through the hard times.
That makes sense. I mean, in my experience talking with a bunch of founders, it's very similar because there's just so much challenges and issues that you're going to face along the journey. If you're the type of person who's going to basically take not even the second or third or fifth challenge, like you have to, it's like Naval says this very interesting thing. I forgot his last name, Naval.
Is it Ravi or something?
Yeah, something like that. But one thing that really sticks with me from one of his interviews is like, he's like, a startup is an infinite set of problems. And so you need to find people that have like a sense of agency, where they can just like find and search the biggest problem that's the most important and then try to solve it themselves to the best of their ability. Because like, it's just like, if you've ever been in the grind of it, you're like, if you have a startup and you have not worked 16-hour days, and you haven't, there's something that wrong that you're doing, because there's just so many things. There's definitely periods of times where there's just so many things that need to be done, and so many failures that can come up. So I think it's definitely important to have that passion factor to drive you through those very difficult periods, right? So yeah, I think that makes sense. Naveed.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that you brought up that is, very important in the journey of an entrepreneur or a founder or a builder, right, is perseverance. We were talking about this earlier this week, the idea of motivation and discipline, and commitment, right? And, for me, when it comes to like dedication, like we're talking about like the gym, right? And so I know what to do at the gym. So sometimes I may not feel motivated, but I'm still going to go and just get through it, right? But there's really not so much of a pursuit of figuring out, because I already know what to do. It's just having to get it done. But in your journey, as you're going through this, right, of course you're mission driven, you have this idea, you're wanting to do it, but there's these moments of motivation, and there's moments of like, I got to take care of my family, I got to do this, and this, but I also need to do this for your business or for your idea or MTF, but there's a lot of problems that you're getting that's probably for the first time you're getting, and you need to solve it. So there's that one hurdle of you having to do it, and there's a second hurdle of I need to also figure it out. How do you propel yourself through those challenges? Like, what is your frame of mindset that really gets you to the other end?
I mean, I think often it's just to ask why are you doing it, right? Like, why are you kind of sticking at it? And there have been like many hard days through all the different kind of ventures and things I've kind of gotten myself involved in, where I sit there and I'm like, why? Like, this is really hard. I think specifically for me, because I went full time on Muslim Tech Fest about a year ago. And one of the reasons behind that, so all of this community building stuff, like Islamic Makers, all of that stuff was on the side of having like my day jobs. And so my last job, when I was kind of working in the VC world, it was very specific, kind of after kind of, October, all the Gazas, all of that stuff. And the VC world, it was not the most kind of, supportive place to kind of work in. What was more jarring for me at that point in time was I worked in impact VC. So people who supposedly cared about people and planet, but not people that looked like me. And it wasn't like anybody said anything rude or anything. It was just the eerie silence in the community. And then obviously privately, I might speak to one or two members, etc. And I think that eerie level of kind of silence started to give me a level of kind of discomfort. And I generally loved that job. It was a great job. 3 days a week I was working. It was my skill set. It was a great job to have after having my little one. It was great. Like, it generally was. Mm-hmm. And it just switched. It literally went from like, yeah, this is great, this is easy, to, or something is not sitting right with me. So going back to the why, right? And I think for me, that why was, and I think with Muslim Tech Fest, we have done our first one. We were building up to the second one, and I just remember sit down with my husband and just be like, I think it's time I actually give something full-time focus. And I think I really want to give Muslim Tech Fest like a focus. I think there's some kind of commercial viability here where actually maybe I can make a living from this thing, and etc. And, you know, alhamdulillah, we were in a privileged positions. The sums worked out for me to take that risk. And, you know, it's been a year. Now I look back on it and I'm like, okay, all right, alhamdulillah, you know, I managed to pay myself kind of the equivalent of my part-time job. Wasn't much, but hey, it's something, right? At least it's matching me. But then on the flip side, you know, when I had my part-time job, I was doing consultancy and all this other stuff. So I was still making more money, you know? Now I'm not, right? And so sometimes those thoughts seep up in my head. And then when I go back to the why, I'll tell you, there have been countless times when random community members, I remember a community member I met at the Muslim Tech Fest San Francisco. He's actually come to London as well. And he sent a picture from when he was in Makkah, and he basically said, we're making dua for you guys. Yesterday, I received another picture from one of our speakers, again an international speaker, saying a picture of a wheelchair. We've done a walk for MTF. Like, it's kind of like, I think those are the whys that, like, even though it financially right now might not be paying off per se, it's trusting the process. Mm-hmm. And I think that's when you have that conviction, right? And that conviction, I think, comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in my case, because it's so centric to like Muslimness and uniting the community, it's almost like trusting that, like almost like that blind conviction. And obviously in my case, it's very specific because it's easy, right? It's Muslim, you know, you could kind of think. In other people, even if it's not related directly, I think it's knowing if you have that conviction, and if you can really have that conviction, I think that conviction and aligning it with Allah, and aligning it with your why and why you were put into this world and what skill sets you have to serve this world, and also like you know, and also kind of our hereafter. And if you can combine those two things, then I think that is basically like what kind of allows you to stick. I don't even think I answered your question.
No,
off on a tangent, but
no. I think you did. You know, I mean, you actually did more than that. I think it's really important to recognize payment more than just a bank account.
Yeah.
Right. And I think we get really stuck into that loop, especially in the Western space of, you know, at least for us, it's like bi-weekly paycheck, right? Yeah. So it's like, okay, cool. And you just kind of get stuck into that flow. But I think it's incredible that you have people who are reaching out to you and then keeping you in your duas, right? Yeah. Or, you know, I think all these things are that will add to your scale for, you know, on the day of judgment, inshallah, and like, you know, in your favor. And beyond that, there's also the connections that you're helping cultivate for other people that you don't even know, right? Yeah. So there's probably someone who may got a job opportunity by being, you know, coming to these events, right? And because of that, they're able to provide for their family, right? And so it's kind of incredible of the seed that, you know, y'all have planted, and, you know, all these connections are getting further and further from the tree, but they're also part of the main core and original vision that you guys kind of had set out for. So it's being cognizant of, sure, I'm making less, but alhamdulillah, you're still able to maintain, you know, the things that are important for your life, but also you're getting payment, the non-monetary sense of, oh, I'm helping the community, I'm helping someone that's mission driven. One thing that you talked about that I do want to explore, because I think that it is like a lot of people experience, whether it be religious minority groups or you know, people of color, you had mentioned like not feeling supportive or not supportive, right? What did that look like? Because I think sometimes people get into a position where they feel like that, and they're in that feeling of like isolation, and they don't really know what to compare it to. So sometimes they kind of gaslight themselves into thinking that, oh, maybe I'm being too sensitive or something like that, right? Could you expand a little bit more on what that felt like or what that looked like for you in your experience?
Yeah, sure. So I think there's been multiple like points in my kind of proper job career where I've had those kind of moments of otherness, if you want to call it that. Like I think for me, so I think one thing about me is, so alhamdulillah, like I've always been kind of very, like not shy from my faith. I only started wearing a scarf like a year ago, so even before then, like for me it was like, you know, I remember like that coding boot camp, just like I always make a joke about how I like busted out my prayer mat like during break time when all the staff quickly left, and it was good because it started a conversation in that office to be like, oh, like, do you need a private space or can we help you or whatever? And I was like, oh no, it's fine, like I just need my corner. But actually what that did was plant a seed, because when we moved to a new office, they were like, oh, okay, cool, like you pray in that mezzanine bit. When Muslim students would come, they would be like, oh, wait, can I pray? And I'm like, oh, I pray there, you can pray there. But then when they acquired another floor, they actually thought about a prayer space or a quiet space or meditation space, whatever you want to call it, right? So sometimes I think it's just that kind of level of kind of trying to just like own your faith. But then on the flip side, like when, you know, you start to kind of second guess yourself to be like, you know, am I kind of being a bit sensitive about certain things, etc. I think ultimately you've just got to like find your people. And, you know, if there are other Muslims that work in your company or etc., like seek them out. And again, when I was in government, I set up in my department, I set up the Muslims at GDS community to bring together the 20 Muslims that they were across, you know, 500 people, etc., that were in that building. But creating that community ultimately then led to kind of us having those conversations that we needed to have. And, you know, like working in government has a whole other kind of kettle of fish of things that you have to navigate and stuff like that. So I think there's seeking your people, I think, is definitely really important. And if you are the only person, like, then find a Muslim professional group, you know, another Muslim professional community out there, and find somebody who might also be a Muslim accountant somewhere, you know, and just find your people so that you can have these conversations to kind of understand that it's not in your head. And actually you just need to just, you know, like just speak to people, and then that'll almost give you that kind of sense of kind of belonging.
Yeah, I mean, I think seeking... Oh, I'm about to sneeze. Is it gone? We'll find out. Tune in next time. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great point, right? Is finding your community helps you have a better understanding what other people's experience is like, which is kind of like a big reason why we started this, is having these dialogues and conversations around that entire journey, right? And how to navigate it. You know, I think one of the things that I always advocate for people is that it can be difficult, you know, if it's safe and you're able to do so, if your life isn't in danger. And this is coming from someone who we both live in Texas, so gun carry is, you don't need any sort of license. So, you know, if it's somewhat safe to pray, then, you know, pray. Because I do think like all those opportunities it's a form of dawah, right? It starts conversation. And I remember one time when I was working, I'm a consultant, and I was working for a client, and I had gone out by my car to pray because I don't want to pray like in the middle of like the office space. And it was like around lunchtime, and someone had come out and they saw me. And so when I went back in, they're like, hey, do you need a space to like pray? Like, we don't want you to go pray outside. It's like 110 degrees Fahrenheit. And so, you know, and I was like, yeah, that'd be great. Actually, that'd be awesome. And alhamdulillah, they were able to create that space.
I think it's having bravery, but it's bravery to ask in a way, right? Because sometimes I think you know, in my case, I didn't ask. I just like, as soon as everyone snuck out, I quickly like prayed. In your case, it was going that thing. But actually, what if we were brave enough to actually, when you start that job, to be like, hey, like, this is kind of what I need, or even use it as part of your negotiation. And I know people who do that now going forward, you know, and use that in that sense to kind of make sure that you are entering an environment where you can kind of fully be Muslim and kind of be yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I'm kind of curious about is, you know, Hamza's married and has a child, and of course you're married and you have a child. How is balancing all of that as a founder? I mean, I know his side, so please speak on it. But I mean, I look at y'all.
I am like nothing compared to my wife. Just want to say that publicly. Yeah. Like I do nothing compared
Shout out to Hamza's wife.
No, just to have to put that on the record.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's awesome. It's awesome is the answer. Yeah, but yeah, we'll would love your input on this.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, biggest shout out to my husband, also called Hamza.
Wow, I feel like we keep running into Hamzas.
I know. We've had 2 other guests that were Hamzas already.
And then one of the companies I'm advising right now, they literally like, I'm the founder is the CEO is Hamza. I'm as an advisor I'm Hamza, and then the COO is Hamza.
So diverse.
Very diverse. Three Hamzas. I was like. I always tell everyone, if you don't have a Hamza...
DEI crisis on names there, man.
If you don't have a Hamza around you, go find one. They're great.
Yeah, so alhamdulillah, I think he has a kind of a massive role to play in terms of the work that I do for the community, right? And I think... so we've been married 6 years, I think, alhamdulillah. Yeah. Alhamdulillah. So I've had a little one, and my little one is about 3.5 now. So I think, like, for me, it was, you know... it all comes down to how you balance things in the home, right? And balance is key here, right? And I, I remember when I had Dua, and obviously that first year is intense. I was on maternity leave, you know, you've got a little one, you're like feeding and all of that. So a lot of it is often on the woman, and naturally, you know, is so. The biggest frustrating thing for me was at that point in time, MTF didn't exist. So I had Mozambique makers, I had my little community. And I wouldn't say I don't know, maybe it is jealousy, or maybe it was just like resentment. Not resentment, but it was like, so all the other Muslim guy founders around me were just like, could do their thing, right? And it was very frustrating because I felt like I was being left behind. Like all the other communities, all the other companies, whatever it was, everybody else was just like snowballing. And then there was me who was like trying to like, you know, balance kind of motherhood now and trying to like figure it out. And Mozambique Makers is kind of was volunteer run. Alhamdulillah, I got some funding just before I was about to have my kids. So this is what I mean. The right people have always come into my life because of Barca in that sense. And so I was able to employ somebody to help me with admin and stuff like that. But even still, I was still the leader, right? And there's only so much kind of headspace you have for leadership, right? So it was like a very kind of confusing time for me, which I think also kind of made it really hard, because sometimes I would be like, oh, but all these like Muslim guys, yeah, they're married too, but I know their wives probably like doing everything, which is like making it easy for them to kind of like thrive in that thing. And then obviously I think, you know, once you're kind of out of that year, and then once I was kind of back into work, and then me and my husband are trying to find the flow between childcare and me going back to work, and then me trying to balance the community work, like we just found what worked for us, you know, a combination of kind of nursery, me flexibly working. So it would be like she'd go to nursery in the morning, I'd have her for the whole afternoon, then she'd go to him in the evening, and I'd work in the evening. And I just think it was like chaos, like in that sense, for like the first 3 years. And in the UK, like when your child turns 3, you get like 30 hours of like free childcare, which has kind of
That's awesome.
What?
Yeah.
Oh, I could use that.
Oh my God.
But
what are these other benefits?
It's kind of fixed. And it's actually been really interesting, because what's happened is from January, she now does kind of 3 full days, because she has my husband does compressed hours, so he has her on Monday. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, she kind of goes nursery, and then I have on Fridays, right? So again, we found a schedule that works. But the benefit of when she was able to go full time was I realized that I was neglecting myself a lot of the time. Like I wasn't going to the gym, for example, right? Because I was like, oh, I can't go to the gym because I've got to pick her up in a couple of hours, so I can't spend an hour in the gym. But when I have a whole day back as normal, and the fact that we could start eating as a family again, right? There was all these sacrifices that we made like over the last 3 years because of this crazy schedule that we had between us, that we barely ever ate as a family. And now, okay, MTF has been a bit annoying over the last couple of weeks, but saying that, you know, there's almost like, okay, at least, you know, 2 or 3 times a week, like we definitely like eat together as a family, and that's just like the thing, right? To try and kind of get that balance. So yeah, so I think a lot of it is kind of, alhamdulillah, having that kind of supportive kind of husband, kind of to really kind of help me and allow me to do this kind of community work, because I think, you know, he knows how important it is to me, and he knows kind of the goodness it kind of brings, and then like where he needs to kind of step in, he'll step up. And like, you know, even today we were like loading up the car with like MTF stuff, and tomorrow he's gonna come and like help me drop some of the stuff while my in-laws look after my little one. And you know, he'll be there on Saturday, so you'll see my little one as well. But yeah, it's one of those things where I just think you just kind of have to find something that kind of works. And I think especially for women, I think especially if you're like super passionate about your career or whatever it is, then you kind of really got to find somebody who is proud of you and it doesn't resent you, which unfortunately does happen a lot in our community as well.
Like when you say in our community, do you mean specifically in the UK, or you've seen this across the globe?
I think just, maybe I'm talking more kind of South Asian kind of culture.
Like the Desi community.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, exactly. Where sometimes that kind of stuff can prop up, where like, you know, it's a bit like, oh, like, you know, there can be a bit of that. But I think it's just, you've just got to meet your match, really.
How do you, you know, I guess for folks who like need that advice, right? How do you work through that, right? Is that just like active conversation, or is this more like a
can I take this
premarital vetting question? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, pure marital. Well, I think part of it is kind of like, you know, there's a reason why people relate having a co-founder to like basically being married, right? Like it's very, I mean, there's obviously differences, but it's kind of close in terms of like the level of intimacy of the brain, right? From
I was about to say.
level. No, but you really get to understand that person's psyche, especially if you've worked with them for at least 5 years, right? Like you get to know how they think and operate, and you trust them to the point where, hey, you go do that. I trust your judgment. You need to have that with your spouse, right? Especially when you have like to care for something. And so it's like the way we, like at least Rumshire and I, we approach things is it's the same thing. We'll try things at a very small level or just iterate. All right, what works, what doesn't work. Then we'll finally come to like the schedule that you were talking about. And then it's like, okay, this kind of works for us. And we like just take a step back. We're like, okay, how can we make it better? Like, can we ask one of the moms to, like, alhamdulillah, we're blessed to have both parents near us. So we're like, hey, can we have one of the moms take over for a day just so you can get some free space? And hey, what are the challenges with what's today? So it's just like the same thing that you go through with your business process, right?
I see.
At least I feel like I take that framework to everything I do, which you've probably seen a little bit of.
No, I think you're right. I think that's it, right? You find kind of like what works. And I think in the kind of the modern day and age, like you speak to any parent, they'll tell you their schedule and you'll be like, that sounds crazy. Every parent has like something super like unique to them and their situation. Like, for my friend, it's like, her kid goes 4 half days to nursery and the other half days, this is split between 2 sets of parents and that's how they manage it. So everyone has it like super unique and you've just got to kind of like figure out which bits you want to kind of work on and etc. Like, I feel like I'm at this like really like, the little one now can do sleepovers at both sets of parents, and me and my husband are like, oh, we can actually go out for a day. We actually went away for our anniversary. We went to Bosnia for like, what was it, 2 nights or something? Alhamdulillah. And like, it was like.
What was the age, like how old, daughter or son?
Daughter.
Alhamdulillah, daughters are blessings. I have a 2.5. She's almost 2.5.
Yeah.
Wow, mashallah. I'm so like,
she's so cool.
Alhamdulillah. So, but like, what was that age where you were like, oh, this is kind of cool. Like, we can do this now.
Yeah. So I think it kind of varies. So I think the first time Dwar stayed away from us was it was our 5th year anniversary, and it was just one night, and we stayed in UK, so that was like, she was. My dad was just like, she did not remember you, like whatever. She was cool, like it was fine.
That's kind of how I feel right now, because
Well,
I mean, my daughter, she is so blessed. She's traveled a lot. Like in the first 2 years of her life, she traveled to 8 places.
Oh, we did the same. Pretty much the same, because one, it doesn't cost. And then
that's a big. And then also like
they're so for free.
In the first 2 years, you don't have to buy an extra seat. You still have to buy all the stuff that you have to bring with them. But you don't have to pay for an extra seat. And honestly, like, you can hold them. It's fine.
And it's so much easier to travel with them. Like
at that age.
Anyone I say that's like having a baby or had a baby, I'm just like, travel with them in the first 2 years, because we just went to Istanbul for actually my co-founder's wedding, and it was all about her. Playgrounds. Whereas actually before then, like, we could, she'd be in the carrier and we'd be walking through a museum and she's asleep on the carrier. Like, you could literally just like do a holiday. The only difference is you've got to change nappies and you've got to feed them. So that is like definitely
easy before they start walking too intensely and saying
I had a late walker, so my daughter didn't actually start walking until she was nearly 2. Like, that was like a whole other thing. Wow,
I think ours got up and running at like 10, 11 months. They're like, I gotta go. No, like I think it's incredible that you have that point of view. And actually, one thing I can't remember where I saw this or if this was something we were discussing, but actually, it was something you had posted on Instagram where you make it very inclusive for like. Particularly kids to come to MTF. So maybe you could speak a little bit about that for those that don't know about it. And then you guys are also offering something that I thought was cool. Something that inshallah, whenever the time is right, like in the age appropriate, like I'm going to bring my daughter to as many Muslim Tech Fests just because of that, because I want her to be exposed to all this stuff. But anyways, like, can you talk a little bit about that? And
sure. So I think this week, a lady was denied entry to London Tech Week because she had her baby on her, and so 3 years ago, I also took my daughter to London Tech Week. She was 6 months at the time, and when I took her, I was welcomed. I was even shown, here's a first aid room if you need to feed, whatever, etc. Unfortunately, there was, I don't know, a volunteer or somebody who worked there, some kind of old lady. And as I was about to go in this like diversity roundtable discussion, she was like, oh, what are you going to do when the baby cries? Which felt very unwelcoming, right? And I like the color from my face had like thingy. And obviously when I went in, and obviously she's a baby, you know, sometimes they get a bit thingy. So I really panicked, and I literally just like left, and I left in tears, and I was really upset because it was an opportunity cost for me, because there was a networking thing that was going to happen after. And obviously at that time, I'm trying to find sponsors for mosaic makers or whatever it is. So having gone through that kind of experience of kind of unwelcomeness, on one hand, it was like, all right. And then on one hand, there's like certain people who would say certain things, and it just puts a feeling thingy. And then obviously it happened this year to this lady as well. And then the other moment as well was I was on this Women in Tech list, and they were having an award ceremony afternoon. And I was planning again to go to it, and I dropped them an email the night before saying, oh, by the way, I'm just going to pop along with my baby. And then they reply back saying, oh, like, you can't bring her. And I'm like, what? You're telling me you're doing a Women in Tech award thing, and you're telling me as a mother I can't bring my child? And they were really apologetic. They said, oh, something to do with insurance, this, that, etc. 2 hours later, I get an email from them saying, oh, don't worry, we've managed to sort it out. We've got a high chair. And I was like,
that's fast insurance policy right there.
Apparently. I don't know what they did. I don't know what happened. They go, we sorted a high chair out. Please come along. Very apologetic. Anyways, little one wasn't well the next day. I said, I'm going to see how she feels the next day. And I didn't go in the end. But the point is, why did it take all of this stuff for people to think twice, right? To actually think about women or think about people with children, etc. So when it came for me to like create Muslim Tech Fest, ultimately, I wasn't going to create a festival where my daughter wasn't going to be welcome, right? So even like when we did our first one, you know, I think at that point in time, maybe it was just my daughter, maybe there was one other kid that came along. Then the second one came. I always made sure like there's some empty room, even if it's the tiniest cupboard room, where a parent needs to just take a moment out. And it's not like in the sense where I was like fully like designing it for children, but I just wanted it so that if a parent had childcare issues or whatever, they felt that they could. So then this year I was like, right, okay, this year how can I actually build upon that? Alhamdulillah, because this year's venue's a bit bigger, so I was like, all right, I'm going to reserve this room as a proper parent and child room. We literally packed a box today of my daughter's toys to put in that room. So then again, if there's any parents that just want to, you know, need a distraction or whatever, they can take their kid there. There's not that many children. There's probably like a handful, maybe under 10 children coming, various ages, couple, you know, some are like babies and carriers, others are maybe like 3, etc. Some of our stall holders are like, oh, actually, because it's a husband and wife team, they're like, oh, we need to bring our kids. And I'm like, that's fine, as long as you supervise them. No one's going to like let their kid run around crazy. And then the youth innovator thing was the icing on the cake for me this year, because I think for me, so we partnered with a Muslim-led organization called Robocode. And they were like, hey, like we run these after school clubs in Birmingham where they have all of the tech. They have 3D printers, robots, VR, all this stuff. And we were like, oh, like this is great. So we were like, how can we pilot this? So we were like, right, let's do a pilot. 10 to 16 year olds will obviously have a super cheap ticket, and it's a value add for attendees on site, right? Because then they can bring their kid, their niece, their nephew, their brother, their sister. And I think, if I remember correctly, I think we've hit the 50. Like we've actually hit the 50 people for our pilot. So inshallah, like it'll go smoothly. Yeah, and then next year we'll be able to extend that pilot to the younger age group, right? Yeah. Because obviously my daughter can't take part in that. She'll have a look. She can have a look at the little robot running around, and I do ChatGPT and all sorts of things with her. And she knows how to prompt and all sorts of things that I'd be like teaching her. But yeah, so for me it's like, okay, like that's a pilot. This is great. That's actually like really engage it. For anyone that's under 10, they can bring their kid along as long as they stick to their kid. I remember my events, my operational director being like to me, you do know children are on the same level as like animals when it comes to like risk factors and stuff. And I'm like, yeah.
From a risk standpoint?
Yeah, like, apparently.
Interesting.
Wow. Apparently children are literally on the same level as like animals.
What type of animal is one?
Gorillas? No.
Is it a cat?
No, that's right. Which is quite interesting for me, right? Because I've always like, I think this year, like having a proper ops director, there's like, you kind of have to start doing things properly. So I'm just like, well, you figure it out. Like, I'm like, you figure it out. You know, you figure out how we make this happen. And you know, like I said, it's not it's not an event designed for children, but it's an event that, you know, is still inclusive to children, that if people had to bring their kid along, they can, you know.
Like they have the ability to, right? No, that makes sense. And I think like we're from the Dallas community, right? And so there's a lot of masajids obviously there. And so like sometimes like it was kind of difficult for, you know, when my wife and I had our daughters, sometimes we kind of felt a little uncomfortable going to certain spaces. Because same thing, right? Like kids gonna do what they're gonna do, right? But there's particularly one that it was Column, right? Like Column is amazing. It's just like this much kind of this community space, but it's also like an institution for education, and they also have a masajid attached to it. And you know, Naveed's kind of goes there all the time. He's like I'm
a fanboy.
He's like famous over there.
I'm a big fan of all of these masajids in Dallas.
So, but over there, like we just feel, and we drive like 30-40 minutes out to go there, particularly in Ramadan, because we feel both such at ease. Like they have a space for like an area where you can literally pray in the back for like families with kids. My wife and I can kind of stay together, so we're both and like you just see pockets of families, and so it's I think it's gotten a little bit more intense in terms of like the amount of people that show up. Like space is becoming an issue. But in general, like that's been the part of their ethos is like, hey, anyone should be able to come to the masjid. So like I think it's really important, and like we literally like on a personal level, I'm like so attached to that masjid for that reason, even though it's a little bit further from me. But that's important when you're building like something like this. I think
it's the future generation at the end of the day, right? So I think it's kind of important in that sense to kind of try and include them, because they're the ones who are going to carry the legacy or whatever it is that we end up building. So we need to include them as much as, you know, we can.
So I want to transition a little bit. So I want to ask about, so you have some experience in venture. Was it just specific to like impact, or were there other venture things that you were doing?
Yeah, sure. So I, as part of kind of stuff I was involved in, I was part of a VC fund called Ada Ventures, initially as a scout, so kind of scouting companies for them, kind of referring, but then also they actually launched an angel program. So I was actually given, I can't remember how much, maybe it was £50,000 or something, that I could split into small angel checks across any kind of founders that I come across. And actually that was really great, because it kind of like taught me like the process of things to look for, writing memos and stuff like that. So that was kind of like, I guess, kind of one experience like I kind of like had on the other side of the table, which was really interesting.
And this was UK based only, right?
Okay. UK based,
Got it. So you have sounds like very good experience on this. So what, and then now you're like involved in Muslim Tech Fest, and as a community organizer, you have a lot of visibility to some really cool people, particularly in the UK, right? Like, how do you compare the UK innovation entrepreneurial scene to like maybe other parts of the world? And like we're coming from the US, where like everyone's like dream is like, I guess like it might be here too, but like it's like a hotbed of innovation, right? It's like they're like I don't know if it's controversial to say they're the leaders in innovation, but like what's your thoughts on that? Like how does it compare? How does the entrepreneurial ecosystem compare here to other places, particularly the US? And then also like how does the Muslim entrepreneurial ecosystem here versus other areas?
I think it's really interesting. So when we took Muslim Tech Fest to kind of San Francisco and kind of like took this whole like Muslim thing there, right? We like the thing that like didn't make sense to me initially was, and I remember asking like my American friends to be like, I don't get it. Like we're like some random Brits coming with this event, like putting it in an SF. Like you guys have communities, you guys have had, you know, OpenSV and TechWadi and all these like communities that have been there for years and years. We're coming, charging a bit of a higher ticket price than the events that they've done, and yet like we're selling out. Like what's going on here? And when I asked them, they said it's because you're so overtly Muslim. And one of our kind of again American friends, Ahmed Raza from Yobi app, like he came to the London event, and he also was one of the people to encourage us to take it to the US, because he was a bit like, whoa, like this is really interesting, like we don't have this here in terms of this kind of very kind of, and it's probably changing, but I think that was something that I found really interesting in terms of like the insight that I kind of got from my American counterparts about like why people really appreciated MTF. But then what was really also interesting is because we had like a good, maybe it was 30-40 people that flew from the UK to the US MTF, And the big buzzword or lesson that everybody came back with was abundance mindset. So everybody, that became like the thing that everybody, like any, after like MTFSF, if you went to any meetup, everybody would go abundant mindset in their talk. They'll always just mention it, right? It just became like a thing. And I think that was a really nice thing because it was almost like adopting that kind of philosophy or mindset of kind of that region and kind of taking it to the UK to kind of actually understand that, you know what, like things are infinite and things are possibilities, and actually, you know, we can all have a share of that pie, you know, in that sense. So I think those kind of like comparisons, I think, were kind of really interesting. But I think there is definitely, obviously, I think with US is always, you know, people are much more willing to take risks compared to the UK. However, I think, and this is me very honing into the Bay Area Muslims specifically. I'm not sure about other areas. So a lot of, so back in 2017, I got to do a tech fellowship, kind of to research kind of Muslim women in tech, Muslims in tech. And the biggest thing I kind of like came back with, so I went to America, Pakistan, and the UAE. And the biggest thing I came back with was, so a lot of the like American Muslims I met, their mum and dad was Cisco, this, that, etc., IBM, right? So they all came on kind of like educated visas, ended up getting the good jobs. So their children naturally already had a leg up. So when you try and compare like the American scene with the UK scene, it can't be like for like, because the UK lot are basically a generation behind, because our parents specifically kind of were the taxi cab drivers, the shopkeepers, the factory workers, etc. So like my generation now is what their mum and dad is, do you know?
Yeah.
So because of that, there's almost like a natural imbalance, which kind of maybe allows the kind of the American counterparts to kind of take more of those risks because, you know, they have a bit more of that safety net in comparison to maybe the UK Muslims who don't have that safety net. So there's kind of much more at stake when it comes to kind of taking that risk. So I think those are kind of definitely kind of some key comparisons.
No, that's interesting insight. I mean, definitely. I don't know I don't know enough about each community, particularly in the U.S. And there's definitely a lot of differences. But the concept of like, hey, you build on what your parents have, like for sure, right? Absolutely. Like we wouldn't. At least I can speak for myself. Like I wouldn't have the luxury to take as many risks as I did, if I didn't have like at least some version of a stable home, right? Yeah. Like for sure, we had some of our own challenges, but alhamdulillah, like it was a lot better than a lot. Like you know, when I think about like a lot of things as well. So for sure, to recognize those blessings and what's the word I'm looking for? Like privilege, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Like I don't think there's anything wrong with having the privilege. I think it's when you don't recognize it and use it. With it. Yeah, and use it as like a, hey, I'm going to be asked about this. Yeah. Right?
Well, I think a lot of it is, you know, not recognizing your privilege, in my opinion, is a form of not having gratitude in your situation. Yeah. Right? Because I think if you don't recognize the privilege you're having, you're not really appreciating that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you a blessing, and you're not appreciating it. Yeah. And I think, and I know people who have privilege and they aren't building on the shoulders that they're on, right? Yeah. And, you know, and that's unfortunate at times. Of course, there's not an obligation to, but it is a lost opportunity.
I think it's something to definitely always like recognize your privilege and like see what you can do with it, right? And I think if everybody could like actually just reflect on just that, then like we could have like a greater world, right? Because then people would do something with that privilege.
Yeah, I had a couple other thoughts on like what you were talking about though related to this, like the general macro view of like Muslim entrepreneurship and on a global scale. And I'm kind of ignorant on a lot of other areas, to be quite honest, but particularly for the US, like we have some amazing talented people, but we have a problem where we don't really communicate and talk with each other. And now like in the last like maybe 2 years, I've started to see like Alif grow, like things like Friday Ventures and like Muslim CEO, like there's like random things that I'm seeing pop up. And I'm not familiar with the intimacy details of each one of those organizations all the time, but in general, like they're all trying to uplift like, hey, there's some awesome talents. We've helped build these like massive, like Googles, the Facebooks, like of the world, all these startups. So can we just start talking to each other? And so I think it's like an interesting time that I'm seeing that occur. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that maybe I'm biased, but I do think that the US has just a lot more availability in terms of capital risk taking just as a general trend, right? Like it's like the concept of going to America is like, maybe it's a higher number now, but like the ability to go become a millionaire was like anyone can quote unquote attain the millionaire dream. Now, whether that's reality or not, like that's a whole other topic for another day. But that concept of like you can just go knock on anyone's door, and if you have a restaurant app, you can go talk to them. It seems like those doors, if they're not open for you, you can just through pure perseverance, like brute force, find your way through. Do you think that kind of exists in the UK, like more from a structural standpoint? Like, do you think like people are receptive to that? Like, what's your thoughts on that?
I think the infrastructure is much different in the UK. I think the infrastructure is getting better. Especially over the last 10 years, I think there's been lots of government things, this, that, etc., to really try and like encourage kind of entrepreneurship, breaking into tech, investment, all of those kind of things. But I think, like I said, it's kind of one of those things that if it's only been introduced in the last 10 years, it's technically still behind then, isn't it? So I think it's just, there's just that difference.
How are we doing on time? Just want to make sure. 4:54.
Probably 5-10 minutes.
5-10 more minutes.
Right? Okay. Is that okay?
Yeah, that should be fine.
I want to go back into MTF. We talked about Desi culture and things like that. Having an event and things being on time is a challenge.
He's
right?
just asking this so we can plan our schedule accordingly.
No, be on time.
Yes, of course. DST, right?
And the reason I say no, so you will be surprised. You will be surprised.
Yeah.
All the MTFs we've had so far, people have actually arrived on time.
Let's go.
People have arrived on time. I've been very strict with my schedules as well, in terms of time management of speakers, and I've been working with speakers for a very long time, so I've always made sure that they stick to their 10 minutes or whatever they've been allocated.
Yeah.
So we do our best to definitely.
We're gonna use Nima to fact check all this. By the way, after the fact, we're gonna feed a bunch of data, and we're gonna be like MTF was done.
I mean, if there was ever to be a thing, it would be like a half an hour window, right?
From
that.
I'm joking. I'm just joking.
What's kind of what's been like, or what is kind of like the current biggest challenge with MTF right now as you're growing it, right? Because I think in my mind, when you're having like the first event, right, when you're doing it for the first time, it's just like just making it happen is like the benchmark. But as you're kind of building and nurturing this currently, what is that trajectory like right now for you? Like, okay, I really want to achieve this. You mentioned the child care and like providing some service there, and alhamdulillah you were able to achieve that. But what's like the next 3 years or 4 years or 5 years looking like for you with this venture?
Alhamdulillah. So I think like this is the 3rd edition for London and our 4th event in overall, including SF. So there's been obviously a lot of things that we've learned. This year has been a beast in terms of complications, almost maybe doing a bit too much, and kind of, doing maybe a bit too much, I think is probably the crux of it. But I think that's okay. That's what I'm saying to myself. And the reason I say that is because I think it's almost like we kind of had to maybe push it as furthest as we can to then realize, okay, what do we scope back on now? Like, what is the most valuable bit? How do we actually and I think the thing is, every year MTF has always done something new, and I think that's why people can't keep coming back, and that's why we have new people, etc. This year we have the pitch competition, with £30,000 investment, kind of never really having that done. Then also, we've got kind of the Islam showcase, again having kind of great Muslim companies showcasing actual things and launching things to actually, this year we've got 2 tracks, workshops, roundtables. And what's really been interesting is obviously there's only a certain amount of seats on workshops and roundtables. If you're going to buy your ticket today, you're not going to get a seat on the roundtable. As simple as that. Early bird gets the worm, right? So of course I'm going to let my early birds in on that. But then what's really interesting is seeing, okay, there's a lot of demand for those kind of things. So what does that mean for next year? Does that mean something else for next year? Does that mean we should double down on a different aspect,
On a personal level, I was going to say, I love those like private, intimate, like real makers that are like really like having real conversations in the core crux of like challenges that they're facing. So they're like past like that validation phase. That, like, what do I do with this capital? What do I do with like the people? Here's the real challenge like I'm facing. Like those private room conversations, I think those are usually what really work well in most conferences that I've been to. And not particularly, I love those the most.
Yeah, and I think, literally there's 14 roundtable sessions,
That's awesome.
14. And that's a lot, but it's still not enough, clearly.
Yeah.
Because I've got people kind of saying it. And again, right, like people don't realize what goes on behind the scenes, right? Like if there's a specific topic, finding that facilitator, making sure they're prepped, developing a handout. And of course I use AI and all sorts to help me in a lot of this stuff to kind of, but there's a lot of like hand holding with a lot of things to get it to a point of quality, right? It's not as simple as, oh yeah, I think you know about that VC thing. Can you just hold this conversation for me, right? And I'm sure you'll do a good job, but it wouldn't be great, right?
Yeah.
And at the end for us, like MTF's keyword is excellence here, right? So like I am like what's the word? Over possessive over these things, right? Because I almost am like striving for like that level of kind of excellence, which puts a lot of work on my plate, but it's because I that's the stuff I'm like betting on the most, where the magic will happen. So I think like all of these, designing all this, and then obviously off the back of Muslim Tech Fest, we've worked with all our community partners who have been doing all the fringe events this week, right? And there's like over 40. It's insane. Like today's the first time I'm actually getting a chance to go to one, because naturally I'm busy with kind of putting on MTF. So the fact that all of this, the community is kind of almost, the way I kind of see MTF often is almost like, it's like a kind of an umbrella, and we really kind of bring all those kind of communities kind of together and really kind of champion each other, rather than it kind of being seen as a competition, etc. And actually be like, well, if you're a student, you should speak to these people. If you're this, you should speak to these people, etc. And really kind of cultivate something. But again, I think like I've been super process driven this year, or half process driven. Again, like stuff I learned from last year. What other stuff I could do this year? Okay, where's that Google form? Hello, let's put everything on Airtable, right? Like those little things. Next year, I'm a bit like, there's something more I can be doing. And I think the biggest challenge for MTF is we have so much demand from around the world of like people saying, bring MTF here, bring MTF here. One, it has to make business sense for us, right? So if a country wants us, put your money where it's at, right? Like don't expect us to like come and just do something for the sake of it, because if it's not going to make sense. And I think it goes back to having a family in that sense of like actually like questioning, is it worth it? And actually like really asking that question, because I think sometimes you need to do things because it's really important to grow the brand. But I think alhamdulillah, we've got a strong brand. Now is a chance for us to actually maybe take a step back and be like, how do we actually make sure that MTF is actually around 5 years from now? And that means Zahid don't get bored in a year where we're a bit like, yeah, that was fun to do, but I'm done now, And actually like build it with proper legs and like proper sustainability, that even if me and Zahid get bored, it could still run,
Yeah. Makes sense.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I think leading with that mindset of Ihsan and like excellence is key. And I think sometimes we get to this mindset like, oh, more is better, but really more is just confusing. It makes it complicated for everybody else.
Well, I think like particularly you guys trying to push the needle this year, it sounds like, right? In terms of doing it, I think that makes sense. Personally, just in terms of timing, right? Like the launch of our podcast is like happening for that very reason now. Like we're like, this is the time. Like I think a lot of people got this revitalized energy around like rethinking the shaping of the world after October, right? Of 2023. So like everyone's like, okay, what more can I do? And entrepreneurship is a decent path. But then basically it's been like a year or two since then. And like now you're letting people like that were serious settle in. Like you have a wave of entrepreneurship that's really occurring. So
the tide is here.
I think like if I don't know, this is our first MTF, right? And I couldn't make it to San Francisco. It's really hard to leave your child, honestly. but I still travel for work. But like in general, like for example, like one thing that Naveed and I were talking about is like, man, if we have the ability to, we'd like to come to every single MTF. Is MTF like a global thing? Is it just UK? Like, where are you guys sitting with it?
It can't be UK. We took it to SF, right?
Well, yeah.
But so I think inshallah, like the real like kind of like vision for me is like, imagine if there was like 4 MTFs around the world in different parts of the world, right? And ultimately what we're doing is creating bridges between the different Muslim tech ecosystems. And that's where I would love to get to. I don't know how.
Inshallah.
I don't know how, but I trust we will get there. And I think, you know, we've got a great foundation to kind of build off. And like I said, there's every day, like I said, or not, that's exaggeration, but at least every month, there's, you know, a message being like, oh, bring it here, bring it here. I've had Texas, I've had other countries and all these different stuff. And it's like, cool, I'll have these conversations with people. But it's like, if it doesn't make sense, it doesn't make sense.
Right.
I think, you know, going back to my experience of like building Islamic Makers, which was a very kind of community, volunteer, not sustainable organization, and then MTF, combined with kind of Zahid's kind of commercial acumen in my community building, like I now see things from a very different lens, that I'm not very like, yes, I'm not like a yes person, because I'm just like, well, actually, I'm in a very different place in my life right now, and I'm not going to like do this if it doesn't make sense. And yes, value and value, community for value, all that stuff is very important. But now it's kind of the point where in my life I kind of have to just actually be like, does this make sense for us, you know?
What would be the next city?
Oh, I mean, I would love, I mean, there's nothing on the cards yet, or maybe there is.
You heard it here first.
I think there's a lot of magic in the kind of the Far East, Indonesia, Malaysia, that side of the world, and we haven't really ventured that. We do have a sponsor who's coming from there, by the way.
From Jakarta?
Paragon Tech. So they're one of the biggest conglomerates from that region, and they have like interesting like products and stuff. So they're coming. You know, they've supported us like a couple of years ago as well. They have like beauty wellness products for like, but it's really interesting because the way they do it is like very kind of tech enabled and stuff. But yeah, I don't know, like I think for me it's like, okay, well, we've done America, UK will always be home. I think Middle East is interesting, but the challenge that I find with the Middle East is when I've had conversations there, people are a bit like the Muslim thing, like because it's a bit political sometimes, like in those places. But then on the flip side, like Web Summit's already in Doha. So then the question is like, Web Summit might not be Muslim, like, you know, like a Muslim brand, but most of the people walking around are going to be Muslim at the event, right? Right. So it's kind of like an interesting thing to kind of navigate, because the thing that makes MTF strong is like we're almost operating in a Western world. So the big question mark I have is what happens when you take MTF into a Muslim country?
It's a good thought. It's a very good thought. Yeah,
and what's our USP then?
Right.
So those are kind of...
Because your unique identifying element is the norm.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think it's kind of one of those things. I think there's a lot to be explored, but I think regardless of wherever we end up, I think ultimately for us it's really about building those bridges and those different ecosystems that ultimately, like, MTF is just the kind of launch pad for things, you know.
Makes sense. Are we at time?
Yeah, I think so. We wanted to really say thank you for coming. We really appreciate it. And like, inshallah, this is a very successful event. May Allah SWT put barakah on everything that you and MTF, the whole crew does. We really appreciate you coming through. Naveed, do you want to take us out for the outro?
Of course. Well, Arfah, the founder of MTF here in London, thank you so much for joining us. And please, Pastor, thank you to your Hamza as well for being such a rock for you and to the rest of your family. Jazakallah khairan. Assalamu alaikum.